But welcome to those of you who can't be here. I've made an abridged recording of tonight's session for you. I've missed out the first sections by mistake, but that was just introducing the main overview of content and how flexible, hopefully, this resource can be. So hopefully you can catch up with what we're doing now. Great. I'll now return to where we are. Hopefully you'll be able to share in that as well. So, right, we did that bit, which was about looking at how the language and the content and the nature of it being about knowledge, character, and skills all helps with the flexibility. So let's talk about the method of these modules. How do we grow as disciples? And if you're like me, I've heard hundreds of sermons and been to lots of conferences, and to a certain extent that's been really helpful. But I hope that there are aspects to the way that these modules are created that help us to dig into formation in a wider sense. What we're after with Way of Discipleship and Way of Servant Leadership is not just information, but transformation. This is about our lived experience. And in order to really be changed by what we're engaging with, I think we need at least 4 different elements. And the first one is knowledge through teaching content. And we're all very familiar with that through our own experience, aren't we? We have lots of books, lots of sermons, lots of courses, lots of conferences. The internet is just packed with potential resources. So we are comfortable and familiar with the concept of being part of transformation, being about having the content. But the second aspect of what really changes us and transforms us is that of demonstration and modeling by sharing the lived experience of someone else. So when we see someone do something or we see their character, that can help us change and be transformed. The third aspect of transformation is actually putting things into practice. So we can learn it, we can see it, but it's actually learning by doing that can be transformative. And then having done that, to be able to receive and give helpful support and accountability helps us to see how we're progressing, to be challenged, to be provoked, to be comforted in the journey that we're making. So, for example, just to flesh that out a bit, I learned a bit of Chinese back in the day. And in order to learn the Chinese, I needed the knowledge. So I was in China for a couple of years with VSO. So when we got there, we had 2 weeks of intensive Chinese training. And the first thing we were given was a book with the vocabulary and the grammar. That's, if you like, the knowledge. You've got to have it. You've got to have the content. But actually, what was really helpful was when the teacher started to demonstrate how to speak the words. And if you've ever learned a language in school, you might remember going to the language laboratory, écoutez et répétez, and just getting used to the feel of the words on your tongue. So I got all that in those first 2 weeks. But what actually really helped the language to become part of me was actually having to use it. So when we moved to the town that we lived in, we would go down the market and I'd have my basic knowledge, my basic grammar, and I would improvise on that knowledge and I would use it and I would try it out. And I had several mishaps, but it's in doing something that it becomes real in your lived experience. And then regular kind of progress checks are really helpful as well. So that's the accountability, if you like, that sense of, am I saying this right? Is this working right? And all of those 4 elements are echoed and used in the way that these modules have been put together. So we see this as well in Jesus' way of discipling his friends. So Jesus certainly taught both his disciples and the crowds. There was content, and there's the Sermon on the Mount, there's the parables. Though it's interesting to note that in the Gospels, Jesus asked 183 questions, gave 3 answers, and answered 307 questions with an answer in return. So his method, if you like, was far more about asking questions than giving didactic answers. So Jesus taught, but probably more than teaching, he demonstrated, and his teaching was often a reflection on those experiences. So he demonstrated to his disciples how to pray. They saw him praying. They said, "Teach us to pray." How to love, how to heal, how to seek the kingdom, and most famously, of course, he made that explicit in washing his disciples' feet. So the demonstration and the modeling is key to formation and transformation. And then he would send his disciples out to act on what they'd seen and learned. He would do that relatively quickly in the process. And then they would report back. They would come back and reflect on their experience. And Jesus was able to offer them both support and challenge in response to that. This is general educational wisdom. Chinese proverb says, "Tell me and I'll forget." I mean, I've preached hundreds of sermons, and I was rather depressed when I left my church last time, because when you say to people, "What do you remember?" Well, just 1 or 2, maybe over 9 or 10 years, kind of sink in. So we retain about 5%, I believe, or even less, of what we hear. But show me and I'll remember, and involve me. In other words, get me to do stuff and I'll understand it. So that 4-fold method, if you like, is embedded in how we are discipled, how we will be discipling through these modules, and is integral to the way that we do it. So just 2 other particular theological emphases that are important. The first one is the importance of lived experience and transformation. And if I can quote someone, at the heart of way of discipleship is the conviction that there is no point in investing in scholastic study while disregarding the visible demonstration of theological doctrine in life itself. Knowledge of God is less of an attempt to intellectually grasp God than it is an attempt to touch God. And as David Tracy says, there is never an authentic disclosure of truth which is not always transformative. So the aim of these modules is to enable those who are participating in them to be transformed, to touch God, to be touched by God in their lives through the experience. And then the second emphasis is that of story. So in terms of content, it's a temptation for us, because of the way that our Western mindset stroke educational system may have formed us, to default to formation through the medium of somewhat abstract ideas and concepts. But as Buchner said, Jesus spoke not in the systematic abstractions of the theologian, but in the language of images and metaphor, which is finally the only language you can use if you want to not just to elucidate the hidden thing, but to make it come alive. And we see that in the way that C.S. Lewis works, often using story to demonstrate truth. The whole scripture is a story that demonstrates truth. So while in terms of the sort of teaching content of these modules, there are a lot of ideas, there are a lot of concepts, there are a lot of quotes. There are also stories and images to reflect and provoke that deeper engagement. And as we'll see as well, in the modeling sense of what we're about, that's about sharing story. So if that's the sort of methodology, the knowledge, the demonstration, the action, the reporting back, the sense of lived experience, the sense of story. Well, how is that done in way of discipleship and the way of servant leadership? Great. So we've talked about the methodology. So how is this done in the way of in the way of discipleship, and in the way of servant leadership? So each session, and there are 7 sessions in the first module being with God, because there's some introductory material, and then 5 in the other 3 sessions of way of discipleship. And there are 8 sessions of way of servant leadership. But each session will combine all of these principles, generally in this kind of order. So before the session begins, there's always going to be a little preparation exercise made available for the facilitator. Then there'll be some opening worship to set the whole thing in the context of an act of worship. And that worship there'll be an offering to you in terms of something you can use, which reflects different traditions and approaches. But of course, if in your own context you feel that wouldn't work, then you can just do what's appropriate. Then at the beginning of each session, there'll be a short time of reporting back, probably in pairs. So the idea is that at the end of each session, people will come away with a response or an action, and we'll come on to that in a moment. But there's no point in generating a response if there's then no follow-up to that. So the idea is that at the beginning of each session, there's a chance to follow up in a gentle way. So for example, you said you were going to try reading a psalm each day last week. Just how did that go? That kind of level of gentle and supportive accountability. So having prepared, having worshipped, having reported back, then you move on to the core teaching content. So there is knowledge, there is content each week. And that content's going to be available as a PowerPoint presentation with a script. So you can either just read it straight off. It's a numbered script, so you know which slides correspond to the content. Or if you don't want to use the script verbatim, there's a bullet pointed version. So you can abridge it, you can use whatever bits work for you. You can add your own particular nuance to what's appropriate. You can choose what's most helpful for you. And I hope that having that kind of approach will enable it to be as adaptable as possible to different contexts. And the script is based around a question and answer format, which echoes the sense of New Testament dialogical teaching, you know, Jesus asking all those questions, and the sort of method of catechism that we've inherited. And it will always include, hopefully, more or less, one story, at least one story or visual image as a way of reflecting different learning styles. And I'm aware that there's generally more content made available than you could do in the time allotted. I mean, you could push through it, I think, or abridge it somewhat. But the idea is that there's enough for those who need to be stretched, and there's foundational material for those who want to start out. All of the material, in terms of content, will be given to people before they arrive anyway, so they haven't had an opportunity to read through it. So hopefully you will be teaching into something that people already have some parlance with. So we've prepared, we've worshipped, we've reported back, and we've had the content. And then following the core teaching content, that's when we come to the modelling. So this, if you like, is saying, okay, well, that's the knowledge. What does this look like in our lived experience? And as a facilitator, it's an opportunity for you to share your experience. And you don't need to be a perfect example of whatever you're talking about. You just need to be a real example. But one thing I'm really excited about is I'm working on creating 5-minute videos of local people from our area of diverse backgrounds talking about their lived experience of each of the particular areas of focus. So there will be a video on YouTube that you're able to access, and having done the content, you'll be able to say, okay, let's see what this looks like in local people's experience. And I'm just in the process of putting those together. So I was hoping I might have them ready by now to show you, but hopefully in a couple of weeks for session 3, I might have done the first one, so I can show you that. But they will be about 5 minutes long, with maybe 6 or 7 people giving short sort of input in terms of how this is enfleshed in their experience. And it seems to me that, again, you know, if it's tell me and I'll forget, and show me and I'll remember, it's the modeling, and it's the seeing people like me, or younger or older than me, or from different traditions, talking about how this works out in their own lived discipleship. So having worshipped, had the content, seen it modeled, then there'll be time each session for reflection. So how are people going to apply and embed this into their lives and learn from each other? So it's important to have the space to sort of let people integrate the content and the modeling that they've had. And then most weeks, depending on the amount of content, in the first 2 sessions, because it's introductory, we won't be doing this, but then thereafter we will. We're going to have a deliberate emphasis on Bible knowledge using what's known as the Discovery Bible Study Method. And the great thing about the Discovery Bible Study Method is it's really simple to use. It encourages personal response to the scripture as well as gaining knowledge. It's the same 5 questions used each time. What does this show about God? What does this show about humanity? What does this show about obedience in terms of how we're called to live in response? What am I going to do in response to this? And who might I share this with? So those simple questions become a framework that anybody can use to read scripture together or on their own. And also, by using the same method week by week, one of the aims of Way of Discipleship is that people can learn by doing. So if you offer a method which you can say to anybody, or why don't you have a go at leading it this week, then you're also equipping people with gifts and skills in terms of being able to disciple other people. And those 5 questions will also be available on a handy bookmark, so people can have them as well. So you've had the worship, the content, the modeling, the time to reflect, and the scripture exploration. And then the final piece of the final part of the process is a time when people are given an opportunity to make a personal response. And in terms of actions that come out of this, there will never be a prescribed action that is given. It will be a case of getting people to become used to saying, I think this is what God is saying to me through this, and this is how I'm going to respond. I think if you boil discipleship down to its basic thing, it is about what is God saying to me and how am I responding. And so the idea is that those who are participating in pairs will be able to say, do you know, I think this is the response I want to make. And the following week, if they've had a response, they will share that with someone else. And then in terms of the differentiated extended materials that I spoke about, there'll be some signposting. So you'll say to people, well, if you're interested in following this up, you could read this or you could watch that. And then a closing prayer. So that's the structure, if you like, of content and method in each of the sessions. And just to say a couple more things about the content, as I've tried to emphasize quite a lot tonight, this is about transforming and shaping the way that we live. And so in order to do that, there are two things that the shape of each module tries to do. One is to establish the mental pictures that help people to understand life as Christians, the renewal of the mind, the transformation of the mind, the overview of what it means to be with God, what it means to pray, what it means to be a disciple. But the main emphasis is actually then, what does that look like in the way that we live, in the habits, in the practices that embed those beliefs in our lived experience. So typically the first couple of sessions of a module will be much more focused around, this is the mental picture, if you like, this is the understanding. And then the latter sessions will be, and this is how we live it out. These are some practices that Christians have lived into for centuries. Just another thing about the content is to say that there is Bible content throughout each module. So while module 4 is know the story and have Bible confidence, so that's taking you through the whole story of Scripture in an explicit way, actually every module is based on biblical understanding, being comfortable with reading the Bible, understanding the Bible, digging into it. So while 3D began at Genesis and ended in Revelation, and was the shape of the whole thing was the narrative of Scripture, by and large formed by the narrative of Scripture, the way of discipleship does that story aspect in module 4, but if you like, is shaped by biblical worldview and understanding throughout each session. And the other thing to say is that while there's not a particular session called Everyday Faith, the underlying assumption behind all of these sessions and all of these modules is that this is about equipping people to be disciples in every area of life, in every calling, and in every context. So, what qualities and skills does a facilitator need? You're not being asked to be a tutor or a teacher, but a facilitator. And one of the reasons for this is to hopefully make the idea of leading this be as accessible to as many people as possible. If you use the language of tutor and teacher as well, it's very much about that upfront delivery, kind of one way, where it can be a sort of more of a one-way approach, whereas facilitating is about how is God speaking and teaching through all of us. So you don't need formal training to be able to use this material. It's designed to be, pick it up, use it, and run with it. So the key skill really in facilitating is being someone who's good at helping people participate. And if you're going to help people participate as much as possible, then it's good to be aware of a few things. Firstly, that people learn in different ways and are formed in different ways. So some people are very word orientated, some people like images, some people learn largely as they do. And as I've said, I've tried in the material to reflect different learning styles, but I obviously have my own prejudices. And you as a facilitator have your own natural style as well. So I think as a start, it's just good to be aware of your own default position and try and ensure that your own natural style doesn't dominate too much, because that will help people participate more. Another thing to be aware of is the different ways that people process things. Talking about introvert, extrovert ways of being. Some people need to think before they can speak. So they need time to respond to a question. And in a group, and actually maybe particularly on Zoom, that can be challenging. So you need to be able to give the space and the quiet for those who think before they speak to be able to do that. if you're meeting in a room with people physically, I mean, you've probably all done, you know, you've all got background in nurturing others, but things like, you know, passing something around and you can talk when you've got it, or you're doing a lot of pair work in terms of discussion rather than whole group discussion, giving a bit of space and silence. Those can all help. This is important because if you're like me, more extroverted, you either think as you speak, or even worse, you think after you've spoken, because we use conversation as a way of coming to an understanding. So while extroverts can bring life to a group and be the ones who fill in the gaps, they can also easily dominate. So if you find in your group that people, they're the same old people saying things, then finding ways to structure conversation can be really helpful in helping the different processes participate. So it's learning styles, it's processing, and then the sort of thinking and feeling aspect, without going too much into the left brain, right brain debate. You know, the right brains are the intuitive, creative types, and the left brains are the quantitative and analytical and detailed types. It's certainly wise to pay attention to thought and feeling in the way that discussions happen, because discipleship formation is about the mind and the heart. So asking, for example, very simply, what does this make you feel, as well as what does this make you think, will enable more to respond. So the more you can share your own lived experience, the more you will be modeling to others and therefore discipling them. That will help people participate. We all need the humility to come as we are, because people don't need an intimidating, perfect example of a disciple. They need a real one. I don't know about you, but the people who've most influenced me are the people who can share their vulnerabilities and their questions, as much as their character, the wonderful parts of their character and walk with God. I would say as well, and I'm aware that for many of you this is really obvious stuff, but do indulge me if I'm telling you stuff that's too simple. But a really key skill in being a good facilitator is being able to cope with views that are different from your own. And you know, if we're doing something across the diocese, one of the beauties of it is we do get that various sense to our groupings. And you know, it is very easy, isn't it, to, when someone says something that you profoundly disagree with or you think is totally wrong, you actually get, I think, an adrenaline spike in your system. And when that happens to me, I either want to push back immediately or to run away. So in those situations where people are saying things and you think, oh dear, then I'd just like to offer a few suggestions so that you can be a good facilitator. One is to trust that God is at work in everyone, whether you agree with them or not. So sort of delaying tactics, like saying, that's really interesting, I hadn't seen it that way before, both honours the person, honours the work of God in the person, and gives you time to absorb what they're actually saying, because sometimes as well what I hear is actually maybe not what the person intended. So trusting that God is at work even in the people that you think might not be quite on the same page as you. I love Jesus' technique of asking questions or answering questions with questions as gently as possible, not obviously not in a passive aggressive way, but it can help us dig deeper into what's going on, because actually, as you'll know, so often there's more going on than we can see, and there's a story underneath the presenting statement. So for example, someone who says, I believe God is always angry with me, may well have experienced a trauma or difficulty in the past. And rather than saying, no, he isn't, we could offer questions like, well, what makes you feel that way? And can you think of a time when you particularly felt like this? Because then we'll be actually going to a deeper place with them. So that's about coping with views different from your own. Also being comfortable with sometimes not being able to or not need to answer every question. We are not God after all. It might be that you can signpost people, or it might be that you can come back another time with some answer. I would say always seek support, particularly if you're new to leading. It's good to have either your priest or a mature friend who can help you. You can always, I'm very open to helping and supporting people in this. And in fact, for the people that are facilitating, I'm going to offer at least a monthly get together online so we can support each other and learn together. And I would also say as well that I would really value your feedback and input in this, because I'm aware I haven't had the opportunity to pilot it. And so the first year of using it will be a time to review and to say, well, what's good, what could be improved. I had feedback just a couple of days ago. Someone was saying, well, she wasn't sure there was enough representation of women in the material. And so that was a really helpful thing to point out. I mean, I had intentionally been thinking about that, but that's something we can make sure that people are well represented, etc. You'll need to be prayerful, because in order to disciple others, we need to depend on God's strength and not our own. You'll need to be comfortable in leading others in prayer and worship. And as I said, there'll always be a resource available for you that you can use. So it's not like you need to be an expert at finding ways of leading people in worship, but you'll need to be able to model that and lead people to a place of prayer and worship. And it will be helpful if you're familiar with as much of the follow-on material as possible. So that's all about being a good facilitator. We're going to have a break in a few minutes, second break. And then after the break, we'll get into the practicalities. So before we break, the final question I want to answer, or try to answer, is once people have done the 5 modules, then what happens next? To a certain extent, the aim of this is that people will have experienced something that equips them to continue to grow in their own lives without having to do another course that's put on. Because they'll have been given the understanding and the practices of growing in being a disciple and the confidence in discipling others. So that's the aim. That's the dream, if you like. Practically speaking, there are 2 other options through way of discipleship. So once these first courses are in place, then using this methodology and this platform of pathways, which I'll show you in a moment, it would be quite possible to create other shorter modules that can be used in whatever context is helpful. The way of discipleship covers quite a lot of ground, but there are many things in it that could be explored in far more detail and over a longer period. So we could well be developing modules around sharing faith, or what it means to serve God in the workplace, or all age discipleship, whatever. We'll come to that after this first year, but those will be being made available year on year through the DOS and Pathways platform. And then in addition to the foundational material, we're working on an overview of how we offer something that's about theological enrichment. So despite what I've been saying about knowledge being important in transformation, but not the only element. I'm still a great lover and believer in studying theology for the enrichment that it brings, for the renewal of the mind. And I think that as a diocese, it would be good to have something that sits between, say, foundational offerings and degree level, and is a kind of more occasional theological 5 or 6 week or 4 week course. And so I'm in conversations with colleagues about what that might look like. So for those of you that have been around for ages, the learning for discipleship level offerings that were around a year or two ago, that kind of level, maybe not offering more than one a term, but having an overview of what the content of those should be, that's helpful.
Guy, can I ask one thing?
Yes, of course.
So you talked about the material that people have in advance to be able to read through.
Yeah.
How much does that differ from the content that you're expecting people to lead people through? So, how much extra is there to the stuff that they get given beforehand?
So the script of the content is what they're given beforehand in a magazine format.
Okay.
So they can read it all, because there's quite a lot to take in. They can read it all beforehand if they want to.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I'll show you what it looks like and
right. Okay.
Works. Stuart, you got your hand up?
Yeah, it was just to say, if we want to use this in small groups within a church setting, are we able to sort of, with some preparation, delegate other people to facilitate their particular groups, or is it restricted to those of us who've had this particular training?
I just want as many people to be making disciples as we can. I think the sort of caveat is that it's better to have experienced something before you deliver it for other people. So the idea would be that the people who are using it have also experienced it themselves. The training is in the doing, kind of thing. But if you as a vicar have confidence in your people that they could use this and you could train them in it, and that would be fine, and set them off, then that would be great. So where do I get the information I need to run the course? And I'm using the language of a course. I don't particularly like it, but I think it's common language that helps us to understand. This is not about just doing a course and then that's it. This is about a pathway of formation. This is about an experience, a journey. But anyway, for practical purposes, we'll call it a course. So all the information there are two areas that the information is stored. One is, if you're a facilitator, is on Pathways, and hopefully you've all been able to log into Pathways and find it, and I'll show you Pathways in a moment. The extended materials for participants are on Dropbox, and the links for those, each session is on your handout. Again, I'm going to show you that in a moment. So all the information for facilitators is on Pathways. You need to be able to log into that, and you'll find on Pathways the notes about how to run the session, the content booklet for each session, the PowerPoint and the script for each session in terms of content, a separate PowerPoint that has the worship activities so that you can use them or don't have to, so they're optional, and the aims and the Bible study content, the video, that's the modeling video, and then the sort of list of signposted resources. So what I'm going to do is show you Pathways. So hopefully Sam has logged you in. If you go on to Pathways and you go down, you'll see the stuff that's already there. So you'll see Way of Discipleship is there. Way of Servant Leadership has yet to be uploaded to it. So do we'll chat about that if that's what you're here for. If you click on Way of Discipleship, you get an overview, and then you get each module here. So the first module of Being with God is uploaded. So you click on that, and then each session for Being with God is here. So we've got our training resources are here, and then session 1 starting on the way, which we'll do next week. Oh, why is it logged me out? Okay, there we go. So session 1. So it will take you to the facilitator's resources, and you will see everything you need, hopefully. So I'm going to show you the facilitator's notes for leading a session first. And you'll see that it begins with a checklist. These timings are assuming it's for an evening gathering. Obviously, if you're using it at other times, you can adapt accordingly or do your own timings, but it's just a guide that will hopefully be helpful. So the checklist is asking you things like, have I got a good sense of the signposted resources, which would be good to highlight with my group? Have I got the technology set up and does it work? First Sunday back in the building last Sunday, of course, within 2 minutes, the PowerPoint wasn't working, but there you go. We've all been there. Is there a visual focus I want to offer for worship this or next week? So, you know, something you can bring to help people worship. Who's doing the tea or coffee? I would really suggest, if this is obviously for if you're meeting in a room, I would really suggest that as a facilitator, you delegate that away, not because you're not dreadfully humble and want to model servant-heartedness, but just because your main task for that evening is to be present for being able to facilitate, teach, model, help people respond. Are there any notices that you need to share? And is there anyone in my group who has pastoral needs we should be aware of at the moment? And this is assuming that there are 2 of you. So there's a facilitator and a co-facilitator. It's always good practice to have 2 people, both in terms of support, but also actually in nurturing other people and being able to carry on and do it themselves. So with your co-facilitator to ask, are we using our different gifts well tonight? If we're running out of time, what shall we miss out or postpone? There is a lot of content, so it may be that you look at it and you think, do you know what, I'd rather do this over 2 weeks. Perfectly welcome to use it in whatever ways most helpful. Who is doing what in each session? So you don't want a scenario where you're saying to each other, are you doing this bit? Am I doing this bit? And crucially, who among the participants can we encourage to use their gifts in leading, praying, or facilitating tonight or next week? One of the sort of hope for impacts of this is that you will not only be modeling discipleship, but you'll be modeling a way of discipling others. So the more that you can help people to participate in being able to be part of leading in whatever way, the better. What and who do we particularly want to pray for at the moment? And how are we offering a good variety in our worship and prayer styles? So those are sort of checklist questions that are pretty much the same every week, really, because they're foundational things. Then you'll always get the outcomes for this session. So session 1 is about meeting each other, talking about lived experience, establishing honesty and vulnerability as appropriate and possible, giving people the overview of discipleship as being with, becoming like, and joining in with God, giving them the overview of how this is about transformation through content, through modeling, and through action. Praxis, use the post-theological word there. And then to reflect on the experience and the role of accountability. So in other words, if you're going to have a group where people are growing in comfort in feeding back to each other, then you want to say, well, why do we do that, and establish that. And it might be that, you know, depending on the group, you don't do that for the first couple of sessions, but as people gain in confidence together, it becomes easier offer that. Then there'll always be a list of things that you need practically to make sure are in place: a TV or a laptop and Wi-Fi, your PowerPoint, and any prayer materials or visual focus. Then there'll always be, as I said, a preparation suggestion for you, scripture, a prayer. Then there'll always be a suggested opening worship activity. I've put in place a variety of different approaches throughout the module. But again, you know, whether you use that or something else is fine. You want to start always with introducing it with the aims for the evening, so people know where they're headed and what they're there for. And obviously for the first session, there's something about introducing each other. Then generally speaking, you'll get onto the core teaching content, and the contents in a booklet people can read. This is all sort of introductory material, but you'll always have the questions that are particularly covered in that content laid out in the facilitator's notes. Then there'll be a modelling and reflection time, which is a quarter of an hour in the first evening, but longer, 20 minutes or so in other evenings, with a couple of suggested discussion questions in pairs. Because it's the first session, there is a second content block, because there's more to get through, about the aims, about what does it mean to be with God, how do the modules work, can I really be a disciple, can we really disciple each other, what will this mean for my life? And then a personal response and action for the coming week. There's no group feedback, but as facilitator, you can share what you feel able to in order to model gentle accountability and trust. So you may well say, well, I'm not going to ask any of you to feedback what you feel, how you feel you want to respond, but for myself, this is how I feel I want to respond in my discipleship. And then there's signposting. So we'll see the list of possibilities, but you might want to point your group or your individual towards something particular. And a closing prayer, which is actually always the opening prayer that you've done personally. So the sense is that having experienced that journey of prayer yourself at the beginning, you can lead the others in closing. And then some questions for review at the end. What went well? Where did I sense God's presence? What can I do better? Was anyone absent that I need to follow up on? And looking ahead to next week, what might I or the co-facilitator share from my lived experience in the modelling section? I mean, that might be that you talk about it together after, or you just do that during the week. So I hope that the facilitator's notes are simple enough to follow, easy to use, and very clear in terms of what's needed. So in terms of content, there is a PowerPoint, the presentation. And as you'll see, I haven't branded this yet in the pathways material as the training slides are, because I'd done 7 or 8 of these PowerPoints before the branding for pathways was done, so I'm gonna go redo those during the year. But anyway, it's old branding style, but it's to show you what the PowerPoint looks like for this and for servant leadership. It's very much a question and answer structure, so you can edit the PowerPoint yourself to emphasize or to take out things. So the first question: what is a disciple today? This is the discussion starter. This is someone who totally modeled himself on Elvis Presley. This is someone who totally covered himself in Miley Cyrus. It's not meant to be a good example, by the way. The kind of, mentor relationship in Star Wars, etc. So then we get into the idea of discipleship being an old idea in Scripture. Jesus as a rabbi, his first call was using that language of the rabbinical discipleship and sending his disciples out to go and make disciples. The sense that we learn as we follow. The sense that discipleship in many ways should be something that we're all able to grasp. And then a quote from the Pope about discipleship. Then we get on to the second question: why is being a disciple a good way of life? And lots of slides with some ideas there. So that's the sort of feel of the content in terms of PowerPoints. So you've got your notes, you've got your presentation. Then in terms of the script for the presentation, so you'll see that each slide is numbered and with the content in terms of what's needed for each slide. The highlighted words in bold are the particular question, and then the slides underneath are the things that answer that question. So what is a disciple? Why is being a disciple a good way of life? You'll see that I've italicized some of it. That's my suggestion, that if you want to knock something out, then you might want to knock that bit out. What was the life of a disciple in Christ's day? What's the aim of a discipleship, etc. And then if you scroll down towards the end, you'll see that is done in a bullet pointed version. So sometimes it's got more detail, but generally speaking, I've tried to edit it right down. So it's only the very essential stuff that's there, and you can adapt and use this according to how you find helpful. There is a content booklet for each session, which the idea is that that's sent to each person beforehand. It is the same content as the PowerPoint script, but done hopefully in a sort of more reader-friendly way. The questions that we look at in each session are on the front. And then it looks like this. So question there, content, few quotes, pictures, etc. So far we've found the notes, the presentation, the script and the content booklet. As I said, I've done the worship material slides separately, so they're not integrated into the main presentation. So you've got the choice of using them or not if you wish to. So I won't blow these up, but you can see the opening worship. This is a slide with the aims if you wanted to show people the aims. And then, oops, sorry, this is closing prayer slides as well. So those three things are there for you to use if you wish. And then in terms of the suggestions for extended learning, there is a handout available to you in the facilitators section, but also in the Dropbox for participants with extra reading or listening suggestions. So the way I've structured it is to divide it into shorter reads, longer reads, things you can watch and listen. And you'll see that for everything that's available, I've said how long it is. So 2 pages on discipleship and all of life, 2 pages on how we are and make disciples, 7 pages, 12 pages, 4 pages. This is longer read, and then things you can watch or listen to, and then book suggestions. I don't always give book suggestions, but if it's helpful. If you've got things that you think could be good extended material as the year goes on, then it'd be great to include those and make those available for people as well. And then finally, in this first session, there's a handout on how to use the Discovery Bible study process. Simple way of reading through, and then the 5 questions and how to use them. It's just one side of A4. So it's all there. So you'll find all of that stuff there for each session. So as I said, participants don't need to be on Pathways, but you will send them an email beforehand, before each session, and I'll put the links to the Dropbox. So the links to each of the Dropbox session extended materials. So you can see here they've got access to the content booklet. They've got access to the summary of the suggested extended materials. There is a Discovery Bible Study bookmark, which you could print off and use. So we can have that in their Bibles. There's a handout on Being a Disciple by Dallas Willard. Everything Jesus said about discipleship. So just all the quotes in the Gospels that relate to discipleship. Longer documents. This is the 7 pages on what is discipleship at different life stages, etc. So there's lots there that people could potentially get their teeth into if they so wished. If you've got that handout in front of you, then you might like to follow there. The last stuff really I was going to cover was just about using Zoom well. I was going to talk about how I think in the future, even when we get back to using doing this in groups, we'll always give an online option for people because it's so handy for people who can't travel. So there we will always have this sort of Zoom context. As facilitators, though, if you're facilitating this online, then you're always going to need to send your participants 2 things in advance. One is the Zoom link and the other is the Dropbox link. And on your handout, I've put sample emails for you. So just as an example of what you might like to send to people. I think that all the sort of practicalities around Zoom are more of a checklist than my sense that you wouldn't know about it. So I think I'll probably just get you to read that. And there's also some suggestions around practicalities about how to run it in a group, in a room, and the layout of chairs and all of that sort of stuff. Can I just really emphasize a couple of things to finish with? If you could keep a oh, Debbie, you've raised a hand. Hi.
You said about when it says about using breakout rooms. I don't know about anyone else, but I've never used a breakout room in Zoom, and I wouldn't know how to go about doing that. So
one of the things that we'll be doing in these next 2 sessions is doing breakout rooms. So
that's fine.
Hopefully you will have experienced it, and I'll be doing the session, but also talking you through what I'm doing at the same time.
That's fine.
We should be okay. Yeah, I'm a bit nervous about it myself.
That's fine.
So we'll be learning together. We'll be breaking out together. Yeah, so at the end of the course, if you've done one of the modules, if you can keep a record of who's done it and feed that back to Peter at the Learning for Discipleship Mission team, partly because the 4 modules are going to become the foundational modules for people who want to explore licensed ministry. So we need a record of people who've done them. But also, there will 3Ds had 2 services in the cathedral a year. One is a beginning service and one's an ending service. what we're going to do is we're going to have an ending service every year for Way of Discipleship, and anyone who's done any module will be invited to come. So even if you've only done a 5-weeker, you'll be invited to come along, and you'll be given a sort of certificate saying you've done that module. And there'll be a sense in which this service is about commissioning you for living that life of discipleship. So we will need to know whether or not you're running this in a sort of diocesan capacity, or whether you're just using it as a resource within your own church community. It'd be really great if you could feed back to us, those who've done the course or a module. And also, from my point of view, in terms of finding people to multiply facilitators and give people confidence in doing it, then knowing who's actually done it will be really helpful as well. So, and then the last slide is, what do I do now? So if you're looking into facilitating Way of Discipleship, the next 2 weeks we'll do sessions 1 and 2. I'll talk you through it, help you experience it. If you're not on Pathways, you need to be able to get on Pathways. Do get in touch with Sam or Peter about that, and they'll help you if you're struggling. On the handout with the Dropbox links for things that you would send as an extended materials, if you can just check that you can access those materials, that'd be really helpful. And then tomorrow I will email you as if you are a participant in Way of Discipleship, and I will send you the link to the first content booklet. So if you would like to read through that before our session next week, you'd be very welcome to do that. As I said, if you're just interested in servant leadership, touch base with me and we'll talk more specifically about that outside of the room. Practically speaking, I don't know how many people want to do this as a course at the moment, because the people are still signing up. So for those of you who are willing to be part of the diocesan team, my aim is that we will have several online groups running this with 2 people doing it, leading it. And the number of groups will depend on the number of people who want to participate. So once I know that, there'll be a sort of exercise at the end of September, stroke early October, where I'm trying to create groups and match them with facilitators. If I was in a physical space, I would be looking for groups of no more than 12 people, between 8 and 12, in order to facilitate this well. In an online space, I'll be looking for groups of about between 6 and 8. So, if you are able to be part of the diocesan offering, then there would be at the most 10 people on Zoom with whom you do this first module, and then we'll review for the forthcoming modules as well. And as I said, if you're facilitating this, whether in your own context or across the diocese, I will always be available, always willing to learn, adapt, and to support you. And we'll have regular check-ins. Great. Well, I said 9:45, but it's 9:10, so I guess we'll just have to sit here. So let's have a few minutes for, I'll tell you what, to model the introvert reflection opportunity. We'll just have a minute or 2 of quiet. You might like to turn your camera off so you don't feel everyone's looking at you. So you have a chance to think, is there anything I really want to dig into and find out? And then in a moment, I'll call you back and we'll see what people want to ask. If no one's got anything, that's no problem, but do feel free to ask or raise anything. Kate, I can see your hand.
We're hoping to have a group within the parish. If we don't kind of get 8 people, say we only get 4 people who are interested, would there be a possibility? Would you be interested in us kind of offering those places out more locally, or for people who are showing up across the diocese?
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, if you're running, are you talking about running it online in your parish?
Yeah, we're talking about running it online. Well,
Yeah,
between now and Christmas, I think it'll have to be online, won't it?
Yeah, I mean, let me know what you're doing, and we'll, you know, if there are other people, we can make it work for sure.
Okay.
Yeah. But on the other hand, if you've got 4 people and you really want to invest in those 4 because you know them and they're local, then feel free to do that as well.
Okay, fab, thanks.
Anyone else? Jeff and Jan. Jeff.
Yeah, Guy, just want to thank you for firstly for all the hard work you put into all the materials. Amazing,
Thank you.
great resource. Query on your methodology a wee bit. I wonder if giving people the same material word for word as you're going to teach them is a bit demotivating. I wonder actually whether people will be more kind of interested in grit if they are given the content after you've done the teaching. You know,
Sure.
I know when I've been in conferences and people have just read out exactly the same thing as I've got in front of me, you know, I lose interest. It may just be me.
No, totally get that. And there's nothing worse than people having handouts and reading through them while you're talking at them, is it? So, you know, I mean, I'd say that's your call, really, depending on who you're working with. I would value that. I think it can be valuable either way. So, you know, if you want to give it after, that's fine. If you feel giving it before would be helpful, then that's fine too. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Jan?
Yeah, just echo, thanks for the content. It's so rigorous, and just the principles and the educational, you know, the guidance for people in facilitating is absolutely brilliant. Just a question on, in my mind and in my experience, disciple making is incredibly relational. And I know it's a difficult time we're living in, but how much would you encourage during maybe the module to have some opportunity for one-to-one contact with the people in your group, so that you get just maybe a little bit of a deeper understanding of them and a more of an opportunity to share your life on life? Because I think in my experience, it sort of takes a big step on when you can have the one-to-one relationship.
Yeah, I mean, what we're trying to do is help people grow as disciples, not get through a course. And the course is the resource that might give you a framework, content, an ethos, but like you say, it's about so much more than that, isn't it? And if you've got the relationship and if you've got the capacity, I mean, it's about loving people, isn't it? You know, if you love the people that you're walking with, then you'll want to do more than deliver a course. Having said that, some of us are in contexts where just to get people together for 2 hours a week is a real achievement. So it depends on what your capacity and situation is. But yeah, I mean, you know, this is why I think the language of tutoring and teaching doesn't quite capture it all for me, because it's actually about giving yourself to people.
Yeah.
If you want to decide, and so that's the spirit of the thing, really. And
I think just adding to that, also the prayer time that you have for each of them, particularly with the co-leader. I personally, I think that's a high priority. Because it's God that does the work, basically.
Yeah, and that is spelled out in the notes, to pray for each member of your group each week. Yeah.